Okay, so we have a registration page. We can grab the content from a form. We want to send it over to a server. Okay. Typically, the way we would do that is we would put our HTML input fields inside of a form. We would do something like this. We would say, grab the registration, and we would say form. Oops. We would say form. We would close this form. And then we would say, hey, browser, if they click on the submit button, right, send it over to the server. And here we would provide a URL of where in the server somebody's handling this, right? Where to send it on the server. We would say, slash register, I don't know, user slash register or something. And depending on what was handling in the back, maybe it was a PHP script or Python or JSP or whatever, right? Somebody on the server was listening to this. Well, we're not going to do any of this, right? We're not going to do any of this. Instead of using the default browser's submission, okay, instead we're going to be doing it ourselves using a technology called AJAX, okay? So it's I think it's an asynchronous JavaScript for XML, right? That allows us to programmatically send data to the server, right? On demand, when we want, not when the client or the browser wants, at any time, right? And it's the technology behind such really cool things that we see on web pages today. For instance, if you ever played with Google Maps, as you're scrolling or panning the map, obviously it doesn't have all the images right away, right? Instead, as you move around, the back end, the JavaScript behind the page is creating lots of requests back to the server. It says, hey, give me more images because I have to fill up the empty parts of the globe, right? I don't have the images right away. But that's happening as you are interacting, and this is not refreshing. Very much like if you compare with, way back MapQuest, right? MapQuest, I remember MapQuest. It would do the same thing, but it would refresh the page every time, right? Because it had to fetch new images, right? If you pan right or left. So instead of using that kind of clunky mechanism, we use AJAX. We, on demand, go and fetch data or send data to the server. So let's do that. Let's see. Okay, so in our controller, this controller, we have the user object. We want to send it over to the server. Let's do that. So how do we do that? Well, we have the object. We want to send it over to the server. So how do we do that? So the easiest way to do that is to use a function called fetch. So fetch is a JavaScript function that allows you to send or retrieve data to the server to create HTTP requests on demand. Okay. By default, it generates gets, HTTP gets. Right. If you in the HTTP protocol, there's quite a few actions that you can interact with the server. You can send, you can post data, you can get or request data from the server. You can ask data to be modified by a put. You can ask data to be removed with a delete. So fetch by default does a get. If you don't say anything, typically is a get, or it's a retrieve data. Right. So the way fetch works is that you pass as an argument the URL of where the server is listening for these requests. Okay. So for instance, you might say register. Okay. Presumably, the server might be listening at this URL for register. The second argument is if you just do that, right? If you just do that, let's see what happens. If you just do that, let's look at the network tab. Let's clear it. Right? And if we just type something, we see it register. Notice that something happened, right? There was an HTTP request that went out to localhost 8080/register. Yes? Right? If we click on it, it says that there's no one listening on that end, right? You called, but that number doesn't exist. Try again. Try your number again, right? And so the server responded with a 404. There's nothing mapped to that URL. Right? Okay, everybody good? Also notice that the request was a get. That is the default get. We can change that. We can configure that. The second argument is a configuration JSON object. It's a configuration object. One of the things that we can modify is the method. We can say that, no, I don't want you to use get. I want you to use post instead. Right? And we can say post. Okay, so if we refresh and we try that again, we do a register. Notice that again we get a 404, but this time, notice that it's a post. See that? It wasn't a get. Right? What's the difference? Well, in both cases, you can pass data over to the server, in both cases. One of them, in get, you can pass data as part of the URL itself. Right? But passing username and password on the URL is often considered bad practice. You can see in the URL, the data right on the URL. So instead, post, what allows you to do is pass it as a package or as a payload, right? As part of the HTTP body, HTTP request body, right? So to do that, we can say, I want in the body, as part of the body of the HTTP request, I want you to pass the data, the brand new user, the user object. Right? Now, before we do that, we need to convert this from an object representation into something that can be streamed across the network. Okay? Notice that this controller is living between two worlds, right? The object-oriented, sort of object-oriented world of JavaScript and the network world, right, of streams, of ASCII data being streamed across the network. Yes? So it needs to be converted. So to convert that, we need to convert it into a string. So user object string, we can convert it into a string by using a library called JSON. Sorry, JSON dot. So JSON is a global object available across the framework. And one of the functions there, notice, is stringify. See that, stringify? Meaning convert an object representation into its string representation. Right? So we'll stringify it, so we'll pass user object. Now that we have a string representation, we can pass it along here and say string. And so that's going to send it as a string. And so let's try that. Let's try this. So let's refresh. We get the username, password, and register. It's still a 404, but notice down below, notice that's a request payload, right? Meaning that's what I'm sending as in the body of the request, right? So to whoever's listening. Nobody's listening on the other side, so somebody needs to catch it on the other end. All right. So that's what we're going to introduce next. How do we do that? How do we do that? But before we look at this, look at the request headers. Notice that it's sending it, the content type is that it's sending it as just plain text. It is a string indeed, right? It is a string indeed, right? But I'd like for the server to know that, hey, this is not just plain, it's not just a plain string. This actually has a format, right? It has a object format, okay? So we're going to pass along here. We're going to say, it's not just the content type here. The content type is not text plain. Instead, in the headers, we're going to say that the content type is not text, is actually application/JSON. Right, that's a MIME type. It's a very common MIME type saying that this data has a format. It's application JSON. Right? So let's try it again. And we register. Notice that now the content type they're passing to the server is their application JSON. So now the server can say, I know how to parse this. I know what to do with this. Okay? So let's focus on that now. How do we grab it on the other side of the server? Right, let's do that next.